Good afternoon, IFA members, and welcome to our 2020 FAN virtual annual meeting. It's a thrill to be here with you all. I'm Matt Haller, IFA's Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Affairs, coming to you from Washington. It's very sad to not have 500 franchising advocates storming Capitol Hill, but we are still going to make our voices heard this week, and you are an incredible part of that process. So thank you so much for dedicating a little bit of time in what is an incredibly challenging environment for so many of you, your businesses, your families, and loved ones. So just a heartfelt thanks for joining us this week. I'll be the moderator and sort of MC for this afternoon's session. And just a couple quick housekeeping notes before we get going here. First of all, importantly, this session will be recorded and posted later today on the community.franchise.org website. So if you have to jump off and jump back on, or if you need to send this to colleagues or peers, you'll be able to direct them there and look back on it for details about the discussion and for your meetings tomorrow. There will be a Q&A portion at the end of our presentations. So please use the box on the GoToMeeting app, which is located on the right side of your screen, to ask any of our speakers any questions you'd like, and we will endeavor to get to as many of those as possible before our 4 p.m. Eastern end time. So without further ado, let's get right into our programming. I want to first welcome to the conversation our esteemed Chair of the IFA Board of Directors, a known face to many of you in franchising, and just an awesome leader for everything that we do here at IFA and on behalf of the franchise business model, Catherine Monson, the CEO and President of Fast Signs International. Catherine, welcome.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you for your kind words. I too would much rather all be together in Washington, D.C. Instead, welcome to my kitchen here in Plano, Texas. But what we're doing virtually is just as important as what we've been doing in prior years in person. There is no way for our elected representatives to know what matters to small business without small business owners talking to them. Most of those members of Congress, whether we're talking about the House or the Senate, have never run a business. They've never had to make payroll. They don't understand what that's like. And it's the stories from you guys talking about your real world experience that is going to make a difference. And it's going to make a difference virtually, whether you're one of the folks on phone calls and video calls tomorrow, or one sending tweets and emails to your elected representatives. It all makes a difference. One of the things my team hears me say all the time is politics is a contact sport. And we need to have that contact, that interaction, in order for our elected representatives to understand the needs of small business, and that's what it's all about. We have two main issues we want you to talk to your elected representatives about over this virtual Franchise Action Network Advocacy Day. The one is additional liquidity for small businesses, and the other is liability protection. And what's really great is each and every one of you having given a link to this great little booklet. I'm an old-fashioned person, so I printed it out. It's about 8 pages. But in that toolkit, it gives you the key talking points. You even know what pieces of legislation we're talking about. But if we think about liability protection, we're asking for narrow, defined liability protection so that any business that is following appropriate CDC guidelines will not be sued, because there's really no way to prove that somebody got the virus at your place of business, whether it's an employee or whether it's a customer. And we're not asking for blanket liability protection, but narrow liability protection for a period of time till the pandemic is over, and only for those good citizens that are doing the right things following CDC guidelines. And then in liquidity, so many of you got the benefit of PPP loans, and there's second a round of PPP loans that are being discussed as part of the stimulus package, plus many other things like tax credits. Learn all about them in your advocacy toolkit, and you'll be able to have great conversations or great emails. And this is a critical week because right now Congress and the administration are in the midst of negotiations about what's going to be included. And let me tell you, there are people with the opposite view that are doing the contact sport of reaching out to their elected representatives and having their voices heard. That's why it's so important that we do the very, very same thing. So it's a very critical week. We expect that whatever next stimulus package is put together and agreed upon is going to be passed by about August 3rd. So this is the time for us all to be involved. I know how busy you are. I know we're all busier running our businesses because of the challenges, but you making the time for this is very, very beneficial, very helpful. We're excited to have you here. And now I'm going to introduce IFA's President and CEO, Robert Cresante. Take it away, Robert.
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate it so much. Thank you to all of you for joining us at our virtual meeting. This is a first of its kind. IFA is seeking to be innovative and create new ways and avenues for you to advocate for yourself. And we are embracing the change, just like so many of you have done in your own businesses. Speaking of innovative, I want to thank our sponsors, Paychex, for their incredible partnership, for their generous support. They benefit franchise businesses everywhere across the United States and around the world. And I'm looking forward to hearing from their GR expert, who we work with very often, Thad Inge, in just a few minutes. Thank you also to the very many other important sponsors who are going to be appearing in your materials and on our screen as we speak. I appreciate their unwavering support of franchising, of the IFA, and of your making your advocacy efforts possible. These are really unprecedented, remarkable times for all of us. Consumer behavior is changing tremendously. The economic conditions around the United States are changing tremendously. And we also see the policy and political landscape shifting tremendously. And we are meeting that challenge by being more firm in our advocacy and doing a tremendous amount of outreach. I want you to understand that with all of this change, IFA's single most important guideline is to focus on our mission statement, which is to protect, to promote, and to enhance franchising in the United States and even around the world. And we are sticking to our knitting. In the last few months, we have accomplished an unbelievable amount of legislation and activities on behalf of franchising. None of this would have been possible without our board of directors, our supplier forum, our franchisee forum, and our franchisor forum's active participation in helping us tune and phrase the language that we inserted into legislation. You know, we sort of got it in the right direction in the first iteration, and then we were perfecting at each level. And thanks to our advocates, many of whom you see on our screen here, for making that possible, because along with you and with that leadership, we've been kicking that message out everywhere along the way. Just in short order, we helped significantly in particular franchise business segments. As you know, there are over 300 different franchise businesses that are involved in franchise, or types of franchise businesses that are involved in franchising. We created and helped create and fine-tune the PPP loans that are directed and opened to segments that were previously not eligible for SBA lending. We delayed FASB revenue recognition rules. I know for some of you that those may be a little bit late in the delay, but I think it's worth refiling and doing your best there, because I think it's meaningful to your bottom line. And then I also want to recognize all of you who participated in helping us put together our franchise reopening blueprint. If you've not seen it as a franchisee, please go to our website and take a look. That blueprint is an amazing product, and it has tremendous efficacy for questions for you to ask yourself as you're reopening your business, things I would never have considered but for the input of some of the largest brands in the United States and their thinking on these topics. And so I think it's very instructive and a high value discussion point. I want to thank Tim Heffernan from T3 Expositions, who lent his staff as scribes to that process. The franchise business model is a key to the economic recovery in the United States. I've made it abundantly clear to the administration and to the members of Congress with whom I've spoken and their staffs that we are, in many ways, the canary in the coal mine. If you address franchising, you are able to, succeed at scale, or if you mess it up, you will fail at scale. We have been pushing this message out to the 50 United States governors, to the legislatures there, to the localities in many cases, in Congress, and with all of the U.S. Departments and agencies that are relevant to this endeavor. Your voice is important, more so now than ever. Our fan annual meeting has always been an effective way to make your voice heard, but now we are getting to elected officials in this virtual way, and it is a wonderful way for you to speak and have your voice heard, and for you to make a connection inside of those offices. Since the pandemic, FAN has been one of the most effective vehicles for advocacy and action that we've ever seen. FAN has added over 30,000 new advocates since March, pushing our total to almost 95,000 advocates. This is the largest, we produced the largest ever organic campaign to include the PPP protections in the CARES Act, or the Paycheck Protection Program protections in the CARES Act. We've also been active on the tax issues and other issues that you care about and that you see in your materials. By the numbers, 82,000 total legislative touches have been accomplished since March. Over 7,000 FAN advocates signed our petition for liability protection for franchise businesses. We've hosted over 70 town hall meetings, teletown hall meetings, and I thank Erica and her team for pulling those together, because that is an amazing amount of effort in just such a short time. We understand now that the need for collective advocacy is absolutely greater than ever. We need to help you. We need to help you put pressure on our policymakers, and we need to have them deliver results for our business model. So with that in mind, and on behalf of all of the IFA staff and leadership, I want to thank you for joining us for this virtual fan meeting, and for lending your voice to the important voice of franchising. We're going to turn it over back to my colleague, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate that. So I want to welcome into the conversation Thad Inge, who Robert mentioned. Thad is the head of government relations for Paychex. And as mentioned, we couldn't do these types of programs, or really anything that we do at the IFA, without the support of sponsors like Paychex. But they're more than just a sponsor to us. They're a key ally in advocacy as well. And Thad and I and others in the business community have been working side by side for the last 4 months on all of these PPP issues and other coronavirus related relief. So it's getting to be that time again, Thad, where we'll have uncertainty about what day of the week it is, or no regard for what time things are going to get thrown on our schedules from policymakers. But maybe before we get into some details, if you could just sort of set the scene for us. Where are we right now? What is Congress looking at with another potential round of coronavirus legislation? The next few weeks are shaping up to be pretty consequential, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Robert, and everyone at IFA. I was just thinking you guys picked an exciting 2 days for your virtual fly-in, because the sort of rubber is hitting the road right now this week. Sort of we're at that time where things change hourly, and you don't know quite what's gonna come out. But action is happening this week. And I'll say before I get into that, just the silver lining, I think, of this whole crisis has been some of the partnerships that we've built. I mean, we've been doing it internally around the company, just working with everyone, and then externally, especially on the advocacy front. People that we've worked with in the past, we're really aligning and doing whatever we can to help small businesses make sure they have the resources they need. And so IFA has been a great example of that, of just sort of teaming up and doing what's best for our customers and your members. But we've got a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks before Congress tries to get out of town for the August recess. And the plan sort of all summer has been, let's get another round of stimulus. A lot of the CARES Act funds are winding down. Businesses are obviously in need for some more help, some more liquidity. And so the plan has been, let's try to get something done before the August recess comes into session. And they've got a few weeks here. There are a number of proposals that have been out there. Senator McConnell in the Senate is compiling a package right now. And so we're in that phase of what makes it in, what doesn't make it in. There's definitely going to be some small business assistance in there that's got strong bipartisan support. There's some other provisions that we're kind of waiting to see how they shake out exactly. Once Republicans introduce their plan, there will be negotiations with the House and with the Democratic side. Some of that's already started. We saw Secretary Mnuchin and Mark Meadows, the White House Chief of Staff, are meeting this afternoon with Senator Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. So those discussions are starting to happen. But a big question is going to be what makes it in the final package and how big is it? Is it 1 trillion or does it get up to, something maybe twice as large as that? And so a lot of these decisions are being made this week and in the coming weeks.
And so one of the things that, Robert touched on it, Catherine touched on it, the PPP, I think, is what everybody's familiar with. And, from our data, more than 90% of franchisees took out PPP loans. Obviously, that was critical for, what I think Congress and the administration and most of the business community were hopeful and expected, that to help people get to the other side of the crisis and allow the business community, businesses to reopen, the economy to reopen in the summer. Obviously, that's happened. We're into the middle of the summer, but I think obviously the virus is still, very much a part of our daily lives. And in many states and for many types of franchises, they still have not been able to reopen because of the phases that they're in within their state. Obviously, some have opened and then had to close back down or have limitations on the amount of customer traffic that could be inside, along with other complications. So, with respect to PPP, what's your prediction? Is there going to be another round of PPP made available for, potentially 8 more weeks? Could you pontificate a little bit there, Thad?
Yeah, and the good news is it sort of emerged as one of the bipartisan issues where there is agreement on both sides of the aisle that a second round is warranted. There's also leftover money. There's over $100 billion that's still there, and so it makes it a little easier for them to do a second round. They don't have to. While they have said they'll probably add some money, it doesn't have to all be new money. So we are expecting another round. Senator McConnell said on the floor this afternoon that would be in the Republican proposal that he puts out. Senator Rubio has really sort of headed that up for the Republican side. And he's got a proposal that drafts have sort of been floating around that says it'll be another round, a second round. It's up to 300 employees as opposed to 500, which was in the original plan. And it's a little more targeted. So it has some revenue loss requirements. So it wouldn't be anyone could qualify. But the draft that I saw that Rubio put out, for some industries, you would just need to show a 10% revenue loss. And then if anyone wanted to apply, it went up to, I think as high as 50% revenue loss. And so I think the sort of payroll calculation hopefully will stay very similar in terms of how much you qualify for. Hopefully it'll remain that 2.5 months of payroll. But in terms of that extra step of qualification, it looks like there will be some kind of revenue loss requirement that you'll have to demonstrate. So it hopefully won't get too complicated. One of the things we've all been sort of grappling with once we got the help is making sure it's not overly complex, that we have clarifications on what exactly it means. And we all know that's been a challenge in sort of simplifying these programs, making them workable for small businesses and franchisees. And so there will be some extra complexities, but we do expect another round.
That's great. And I think, most of our members would probably not have difficulty reaching that revenue threshold. So I think one of the concerns in the PPP was a lot of healthy businesses that necessarily didn't need the money got in there. And so I think some guardrails are appropriate. So another question that's on the minds of a lot of our members and is on the forgiveness side. And I know this is where Paychex has spent, a considerable amount of time, both on the, how's it going to work, as well as on the advocacy side, advocating for some streamlining and increasing effectiveness of the forgiveness process, particularly for the smallest of small businesses. And there's some legislation out there, both the House in the Senate, and likely to come in the House this week, that would simplify and go one step shy of automatic forgiveness for businesses under who took loans under $150,000. But do you think that's likely to be included in the next round? And why is that such a priority for Paychex and the other payroll providers?
So it has gotten a lot of momentum. As I said, forgiveness just ended up being way too complex in terms of the way they rolled out the initial forgiveness application, the different interim final rules associated with it, the FAQs. There were just a lot of questions out there, and it seemed like when they tried to answer these questions, it became even more complex. One thing we tried to do at Paychex was simplify it as much as possible. We rolled out an estimator early on that helped people sort of track where they were in terms of receiving forgiveness. And for our customers, we now have an integrated tool that sort of walks you through and automatically populates for the forgiveness application. But there was just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions about why is this so complicated, and am I going to be able to reach forgiveness? And so there's been sort of a wide range of industries, banks, others that have said, let's make this more simple. The administration felt a little limited by the legislation that was written. They felt like they couldn't go that far. And so these proposals that you mentioned are out there that would say, let's either make everything forgivable for businesses under 150,000 of loans, or let's say that you have to certify that you spent the money on the right thing. You have your documentation in order, but you don't have to submit all of that to the bank. The bank doesn't have to review all of that. And they would audit just a handful of businesses, but not have to review every application and decide if they reach forgiveness or not. And I'd say the only thing working against it is some of the discussions around fraud and how do you sort of maintain protections against fraud if you implement this more blanket forgiveness. But I think there's a lot of support for majorly simplifying the process, especially for the smallest loans. And so I do expect something will get in there to make it a lot easier for small businesses, whether that's blanket forgiveness or something just short of that. I think they'll try to make it easier.
That's great, and it's definitely something that IFA supports and would encourage our members who did take loans under $150,000 to communicate with the Hill that they're supportive of this bill. So just to wrap up here, Thad, can you talk for a quick second about some of the tools that Paychex has to help our members and other small businesses navigate all of these new opportunities and programs that are out there?
Yep. And so our membership, our customer base is very similar to your membership in that we have a lot of franchisees, we have a lot of mom and pop small businesses. And so these are folks that, don't have big compliance departments, don't have huge staffs to navigate through all this. And so we want to make it as simple as possible. And so we immediately launched a number of resources, a coronavirus help center on our website, where we tried to give small businesses the information they needed to help navigate this crisis. So one example is we have a state-by-state regulations and shutdown order map on our website, where if you're from Arizona, you can go check out exactly what's happening in Arizona. So we give you state-by-state information. And then PPP has been, one of our major focuses because so many of our businesses did apply for and receive PPP loans. So on the front end with the application process, we were the first payroll provider to get out a payroll report that made it extremely easy to apply. And then on the forgiveness side, we have our estimator tool that's integrated with the payroll system that allows an application to be done very easily. And we take into consideration all the rules, regulations, whether it's the salary reductions, FTE requirements. And so we just try to make it not as complex. But lots of different resources as well on our website about going back to work, you know, how you sort of navigate this new reality as businesses do get up and running again. And so whether you're a customer or not, you know, we've got all these resources out there. We encourage you to reach out. And I would just thank IFA for all of your efforts. You guys have been, you know, huge in the advocacy front in DC and pushing for simplicity, pushing for help for small businesses. And then also just providing the tools and resources to your members. We've participated in some webinars with you guys. I know, Matt, that we're gonna do one on August 5th. I believe it's at 2:30 to talk about some of the things that will be in this bill. I assume we'll know a lot more by August 5th. Hopefully we'll be close to passing. I don't know if it'll actually be passed by then. But we're gonna spend an hour kind of walking through some of the provisions and how businesses can take advantage of them. And so we encourage folks to check that out. But we just want to be a resource and help people navigate moving forward.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that fireside chat, Thad. It feels like I'm sitting next to a fire right now because it's heating up to 105 degrees here in DC today.
Exactly.
I'm glad I'm in the air conditioning and not schlepping up to Rayburn's house office building in this heat. But looking forward to that. The info is on the screen here, and I think there's a link to register in the chat box. So feel free to check that out, and we'll be emailing that around to our membership here in the coming days. Thad, thank you so much. I know you're going to hang out and listen to the next conversation here with the government relations team at IFA. But we greatly appreciate our partnership, your sponsorship, and friendship and support of all of our members in the franchise business model.
Great. Thanks for having us, and good luck these next 2 days.
Great. Thank you. Okay, quickly transitioning to what we usually do at this meeting is the whole team gets on stage and we do a little bit of a round the horn about the issues that we're lobbying on the Hill on the next day. And so we're going to do that virtually here. And so I want to welcome in my lobbying and government relations team and grassroots team. Firstly, Suzanne Beal, who's our Vice President of Government Relations and Public Policy. She's also a counsel to the association. Again, you guys know me. I've been on the screen for the last 45 minutes, so no introduction for me. Mike Lehman, who's our VP of Federal Government Relations, and Erica Farage, our Vice President of Political Affairs and Grassroots Advocacy, or otherwise known as the fan maestro, who makes all of this conduct and happen here over the course of the next day and a half and in an ongoing way. So we've got, as Catherine Monston mentioned earlier, we've got really two buckets of issues that we're going to talk about, and we're asking folks to lobby for. And love alliteration, makes things easy to remember. So we're talking about liability and liquidity. You know, just in building off of the conversation with Thad that we just had, you know, I think the liability issue is absolutely important and critical, but it's become such a priority for both the administration and for the broader business community, and certainly for Senate Republicans driven by Leader McConnell and Senator Cornyn. We're going to talk a little bit about what we expect the details of that to be. Mike's going to go through a slide on that. But just as you're thinking about your communications with members' offices tomorrow and into the next couple weeks here as we ramp back up, I think the thing that needs to come through is still more support to do something for small business. Even if it's just more PPP, I think that making the case that this crisis has lasted longer and had a greater impact on the liquidity of small businesses is there's support for PPP bipartisanly, but it's not necessarily something that there's in the same sense of urgency to do something that there was back in March. And I think if I can sort of, before we get into the exact details of all the various proposals that are out there and the ones that IFA thinks are the best solutions for our membership and poor, Catherine talked about the individual stories, imploring Congress that more needs to be done for small business, because in many ways, we are right back where we were in March, but without the kind of acknowledgement that more needs to be done in a bipartisan way. And that's partly a function of differing some opinions about what to do about reopening. It's partly a function of we're closer to an election. But the only way that there's going to be that same sense of urgency on the Hill and in the administration is if they're hearing from back home and they're hearing that the raw truth about how difficult it is right now to see to the other side of this crisis, and really hearing that personal story about how PPP works, but more needs to be done, and even more PPP might not be enough. So with that, if we can jump to the first round of slides here, and I'll bring Suzanne into the conversation to really give it a broader overview on liquidity and some of the bills that are out there.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Can't agree with you enough. Really, the threshold question that Congress is entertaining now that they're back is liquidity even needed right now? We all saw back in March and April that Congress can work in a crisis, and that's really the question right now. Are we in a crisis? You will have conversations tomorrow where some people think the fall is going to be the biggest economic boom ever. That's a fact. You'll also meet people who think that the PPP is done and they want to put that money into other programs that are favorable to them, like the restaurant fund. So I think the main takeaway, and although we're going to talk about a number of bills, the main takeaway is that we want you to talk about your challenges with liquidity. If you're open, you're certainly having challenges with unanticipated costs with PPE and cleaning and supplies. If you're closed or partially closed, you're clearly having challenges remaining connected to your customers. So we can't impress upon you enough to make sure that Congress knows we're still in a crisis, and that they need to provide additional liquidity relief to everybody. A job is a job is a job. Doesn't matter if you're a small employer, a big employer in an affected industry like restaurants or a hotel or a salon, everybody's going to need some relief. So in terms of what programs and bills and policies that IFA has supported, there are a number of bills. If we could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to first address the different grant and loan programs that we're particularly excited about. The first is one that Thad at Paychecks mentioned. It's S4117. That's the Paycheck Protection Forgiveness Act. That's going to streamline forgiveness of PPP loans for the smallest of businesses that took loans under $150,000. If you happen to be meeting with Senator Sinema or Kramer tomorrow, please thank them for their leadership on that bill. We also support the Bipartisan Restart Act that's been introduced in both the House and the Senate. In the Senate, the bill was introduced by Senators Young and Bennett. This bill would basically provide long-term, low-interest loans to small and medium-sized businesses. So you can think about this as an expanded SBA 7A loan program. Hopefully, some of that program will be forgivable. That's really the question that we're going to face the next couple of weeks as Congress wraps up this relief program. What we're really ideally looking for in that program is a 20-year term, as well as 0 or low % interest rates amortized over the life of the loan. Next, PPP. There's over $100 billion left in that program, and the debate in Congress right now is what to do with it. Do you provide it to specific industries? Does it only go to the smallest of businesses? Who are the hardest hit businesses that might need a second tranche of PPP loan money? So S4014 HR 7241, that's the P4 bill. That would provide additional funding for the hardest hit small businesses, so those that have 100 employees or less, including franchises. And the bill was introduced in the Senate by Senators Cardin, Coons, and Shaheen, and also has support from the House Democrats. This bill currently includes a 50% loss in revenue as a metric, but the offices have signaled to IFA that they're open to dropping that threshold to as little as 40%. So if you have views on what that percentage should be, whether it's 25 or 30%, that'd be really important information to share in your discussions. Also, there's introduced legislation in the House and Senate that's bipartisan that would allow state and local emergency grant funding to complement the federal relief efforts. That's legislation by Senators Booker and Daines that would provide $50 billion to states and localities to plus up their PPP money. The tax writing committees also have been very busy the last couple of months and an important part of the relief conversation. Next slide, please. There are a number of refundable tax credits that IFA has supported, and both of these basically assist workers to remain connected to their employers and also help cover unexpected costs associated with PPE and cleaning materials. These bills include HR 6776, the Jumpstarting Our Business's Success Credit Act. This will enhance the Employee Retention Tax Credit, which was already signed into law under the CARES Act, and it increases the credit from 80% from 50%. It also allows businesses who are eligible for PPP to also take the credit for the enhanced ERTC. We also support HR 7079, the Clean Start Back to Work Tax Credit. That creates a temporary tax credit to assist business owners who responsibly safeguard their workers and customers during the reopening. It's basically a 50% credit per location or up to $250,000 per entity, so a very generous tax credit. Finally, we also support HR 7066, the Reopening America by Supporting Workers and Businesses Act. This is a bill introduced by Chairman Brady in the House that would help local businesses rebuild their workforce by turning their unemployment benefits into a back to work bonus. So if workers are receiving an extra $600 in payment under the Federal Employment Benefit Program, once they accept a job, they'd be able to get a $1,200 hiring bonus. So the $600 for 2 weeks they would have earned on UI, they will now get as a hiring bonus to go back to work. And finally, I wanted to talk about a new franchise-specific tax credit or relief program that we're discussing with members of Congress, and that's virtual training assistance, particularly the emerging brands that are looking for financial assistance to virtually train these new prospective franchisees as they come into their systems. Both the tax writing committees are taking a look at language that IFA presented that would assist with a tax credit to facilitate bringing on a learning management system so you can train those prospective franchisees virtually. I'm happy to answer any questions during the Q&A portion and like to turn to my colleague Mike for more. Mike.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. And hi, friends. Thank you so much for doing this virtual fan advocacy day with us. So as you heard very well from Suzanne, we are forced really to take an all the above approach to supporting measures to enhance franchise access to capital. Our asks on liability, fortunately, are perhaps more straightforward. And we are in this time of 2 steps forward, 1 step back with the economic recovery, as each state has been gradually reopening, and then some states, of course, have been reclosing their economies. So there are so many challenges in this time, and it is truly an unprecedented period. And anytime there is no legal precedent, then it's a scary time for businesses and for schools and nonprofits. And that's because there is no case law on legal claims against businesses during a respiratory pandemic to give guidance on what our businesses should be doing, or any confidence that our businesses won't face expensive litigation, which will only compound the challenges of this current period. And that's why we're pushing for limited liability protections. And small businesses are already facing lawsuits from people alleging they were infected with COVID-19 because of an experience with the business. According to one law firm that is tracking these cases, there's over 3,600 complaints pending right now that have been filed by both employees and consumers against various institutions. And these claims were brought under various areas of state and federal law. So the threat is very real, and the threat of expensive litigation will severely impair the small business recovery, and it already is. So, and if we can go to the next slide, what are we asking for tomorrow? In the Senate, as you can see, we are asking lawmakers to support Senator John Cornyn of Texas, his forthcoming liability bill. It's not public yet, but just end of last week, we are glad he promulgated a principles document that is very promising. And then in the House, we are asking members to support the bipartisan Graves and Cuellar bill. You can see the bill number and title there on your screen. It's called HR 7528, the Get America Back to Work Act. So we really have a fairly clean House and Senate ask here. And specifically what these bills would do is right on the top line of your screen. These bills would provide short-term COVID-19 related liability protections for small businesses that take all good faith efforts to combat the spread of the virus. So let me break that down. What does short-term mean? The protections in the Cornyn draft, which, in the Republican-controlled Senate is probably the most important of these two proposals, it would backdate all claims back to December 2019, indemnify all claims back to December 2019, and would last through 2024. What does it mean that these protections would be only COVID-19 related? Well, these bills would only apply to claims of personal injury arising from COVID-19 exposure. You heard Catherine Monson in her opening remarks say that we are not seeking a blanket legal shield for businesses that would insulate them from all sorts of areas of the law. And this is not that. This is a very tailored coronavirus liability protection approach. And importantly, these liability bills would preempt state laws. So that means these bills would give federal courts jurisdiction over these relevant personal injury claims. And we should note that the Cornyn bill, the Cornyn proposal, also has specific franchise language, which we're very pleased about. It makes clear that a business who provides training or PPE or other resources to a franchisee's employees, that does not convert the franchisee's employees into the employee of the franchisor that is providing the resources. So very important joint employer style language that will preserve our business model. So, and our CEO, Robert, mentioned that in order to provide you air cover for your meetings tomorrow, IFA just last week sent a petition to Congress with 7,500 signatures of franchise business people from around the country. So thank you to many of you for signing that, but that's going to be a big, big help paving the way for your meetings. And clearly we are on the side of angels here, or at least the majority of Americans, because a Wall Street Journal article last week cited a public opinion poll that 80% of respondents understand there should be some liability protections for businesses during this period. So the good news here is Senate Majority Leader McConnell and Senator Cornyn are our top allies on this issue, and we couldn't have any more important friends. The bad news is if you're meeting with Democrats, many of them tomorrow are likely to express some skepticism of any liability protections, but we appreciate everybody for forging ahead tomorrow, for participating again in the virtual advocacy day during these very strange times. So with that, I will now turn to, again, our executive director of the FAN annual meeting, and that's Erica Farage.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining this year's brave new world of virtual FAN advocacy. We very much appreciate your support. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you're going to take action tomorrow. We were able to schedule some set calls and set meetings for a few IFA executives speak directly to their members of Congress tomorrow via conference call. But really, the vast majority of FAN participants this year are storming Capitol Hill. Actually, where I live, I'm on Capitol Hill right now. I suppose I could go storm it by myself on behalf of everyone. But we're really just asking you to take two really quick, simple actions, both of which are linked already in the Advocacy Toolkit. They're linked here on these slides that will be sent out in the recording later today. So asking you to do two things. One, email your members of Congress. We have a FAN campaign, a traditional FAN campaign already set up with all of the asks that Mike and Suzanne talked about. It is pre-drafted. You should feel free to edit it as you'd like to add in your personal story. For any of you that have been to FAN before, you know that adding in personal details, personal information definitely makes an impact. Member of Congress, so please do feel free to edit that draft email before pressing send, but it truly is as easy as pressing send. The second thing that we're asking everyone to do is post on social media, tag your legislators, and use the hashtag FAN2020. Again, in that toolkit, we have an entire social media user's guide, if you will, that includes draft tweets, graphics that you can use on social media, links to all of your members of Congress social handles, so you don't have to look that up. We've provided all of that for you. And we also have a short video script. If you want to record a short video of yourself talking about your business, talking about what you've been doing for your community during the COVID crisis, for your employees during the COVID crisis, we encourage you to share that story as widely as possible on social media, making sure that you tag your members of Congress and also making sure that you use that hashtag of FAN2020 so that we know what impact we're having up here on Capitol Hill during the day tomorrow. And as many members of Congress are hearing from us both via email and also on social media during the day tomorrow. So that's what we need you to do. I think that, Matt, if I can turn it back over to you, and we're happy to answer any questions on the policy side, on the take action side that our participants might have. Matt, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just saying that I think Paul Rocchio is walking around with a microphone in the audience, but no, kidding. There is, if you have a question, throw it into the field in your little GoToMeeting right side of your screen. We've got a few in the queue here, but we'd love some more, so don't be bashful. We will not share your name unless you want us to. So first question here, I'm going to throw it to Suzanne. Has to do with taxes on the PPP. Are taxes going to be treated as income or an expense? It's been a big issue that's been out there for a while. It's been somewhat controversial. Suzanne, can you answer that for us?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, great question. This is definitely a top priority for our association. There was a fix for the deductibility of PPP in the HEROES Act. We know that there's bipartisan interest, so we're optimistic that it'll be part of the discussion and the bill that Congress and the deal that Congress comes to these next 3 weeks. But you know, we have heard some concerns from Secretary Mnuchin about that. So I think really important to highlight that as one of your top takeaways and messages tomorrow. If you're participating via email, please include that. And certainly if you're in any of the meetings, please add that in. Very important.
Thanks, Suzanne. So this is a great question. What is the response when we advocate for a second PPP loan to be included in the next package and a member's office or a staffer replies that, well, the first round of PPP funding wasn't even completely used? I'll just answer my perspective and then you guys jump in. The reality is you couldn't take a second loan right now if you wanted to. So my belief is that if you could take a second loan right now, the $130 billion that's remaining would be gone overnight by many of our members who need to take a second loan because they're still closed or still have uncertainty. So I think that's the primary answer. Suzanne or Mike, feel free to add anything to that.
Totally agree. Nothing to add.
So on the liability side, there's a question in here about the joint employer language. Mike, if you could just explain, where that's included.
Sure. So in the House bill, there's not particular joint employer protection language. It would essentially indemnify all types of businesses from personal injuries arising from coronavirus. The Senate proposal, and again, we don't have the actual language, so unfortunately I can't give a complete answer to this where we sit here on Tuesday afternoon. But it would give franchisors who provide COVID-19 related resources to their franchisees and even their employees some joint employer style protection from any liability arising in this area. Of course, keep in mind the franchisee is going to be protected unless they failed to make reasonable efforts to follow applicable guidelines. So, but that's the good news. Another piece of good news in the Cornyn draft as it relates to franchising.
Thanks, Mike. And yeah, we are very bullish on that language being included. So just a couple of logistics questions are in here. We will send around the toolkit and the bill numbers for all these bills. They're also, if you go into the handouts section of the GoToMeeting platform on your screen, there's a PDF that allows you to just download the slides from this presentation, and they're included in there. But you can also just reach out to any one of us on the IFA team, and we will shoot those over to you as well. Quick questions in here. More than 90% of franchisees did receive PPP loans. That's according to our research. Somebody had a question about that statistic. Question on future PPP or other lending programs. This is for Suzanne. Will there be restrictions on how the money must be spent beyond payroll and rent? Suzanne, if you could walk folks through some of those conversations.
Really, I think that the questions right now are about who should get the money rather than what expenses should be used for the money, to be honest. The question is, how small should the business be, and what is the right revenue threshold to certify hardship? So those are the broad conversations happening right now. Certainly, if you have a very strong opinion on what would be helpful for your business, please highlight that, because that's a really good story. You know, we hear all of the time that the smallest of businesses might utilize independent contractors and not employees. So, you know, their biggest expense was rent. I think that's really important to highlight in a conversation about how PPP should be broadened to be more helpful for you specifically.
Thanks, Suzanne. And this one for either you or Mike from one of our great members in North Carolina here is about unemployment insurance. Suzanne, you touched on this, but maybe just amplify, you know, how to approach it in the conversations tomorrow.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a really important discussion right now in terms of the extra $600 payment. We know that the GOP caucus, this is a top concern, but the Democrats have really stood strong on maintaining that $600 unemployment payment, particularly as states and localities begin to reclose. So I think that if there was a middle ground in this issue, it might be a long-term phase out or a regional type of approach, but that might be too complex for businesses that operate in multiple states. So I think if that $600 payment is preventing you from bringing workers back into your system, share that story, but recognize that if you're talking to a Democrat, the public policy reason why they support that extra payment is to keep people at home to maintain physical distancing. They don't want workers who are on unemployment rolls pounding the pavement, in their words. So I think just in terms of being mindful, the approach is to just share your story and be respectful. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd just say that, you know, we know what a frustration a hiring disincentive, the expanded unemployment has been, even though it's been so needed for so many people. And the thing is, this is such an uneven recovery, and it's not a V-shaped recovery. It referenced the openings and the closures and the various steps forward and back. And we're going to have new rounds of unemployed people that are unemployed for the first time coming up, you know, soon and this fall and as we move through this long-term recovery. So we've got pretty direct signals from the Treasury Department that there's going to be, even from the administration, their support for extending the unemployment to some degree. It may not be $600. It may not be exactly what it looks like today, but there's going to be something likely extended beyond the end of this month.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Suzanne. Erica, can you talk about, there's some questions here about sharing this information with other franchisees who may have not signed up for this presentation, get them on board. Can you talk about if that's something we would like folks to do?
Yeah, I mean, tomorrow is certainly the more the merrier in terms of what we are asking people to do. You actually can still register for fans, still get the toolkit. You know, we want as many franchisees making their voices heard as possible. So we encourage you to share this with your peers in any way, shape, or form so that others can make their voices heard too. You know, we had about 500 people sign up for FAN. But if we can amplify that by, you know, sharing it with your peers, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Erica. Question about what percentage revenue will be included in the next bill in terms of PPP or other. And that's one of the major points of discussion still. So I think being specific with members of Congress about what revenue decline you've seen, I would use probably a second quarter of 2019 versus 2020 as a framework for revenue declines you've seen in Q2. That's probably the best and simplest way to talk about it, since it's been, as Mike said, such an uneven recovery. Some of the proposals are talking about 25%. Thad mentioned, you know, for certain industries, there's some scuttlebutt about it being as low as 10%. But I think, you know, just communicating the impact from a franchisor's perspective, obviously that's system-wide revenue, but for franchisees, I think looking at it on an aggregate basis across, you know, the number of locations you have would be most helpful. Mike, question about the Cornyn bill on the House side, and if we should talk about that.
We should talk about in your House meeting. Should you talk about the Cornyn bill? I think that's you know, the ask on the House side is for the Graves-Cuellar bill. That's the most direct way to do it. So you can focus on that in your House meetings, in your Senate meetings. Focus on the Cornyn proposal, but just know that any liability reform here is likely to originate in the Republican-controlled Senate, and if political circumstances dictate, it is hopefully something that the Democratic-controlled House needs to accept as part of a larger package in these coming weeks.
Thanks, Mike. Question about which issue is more important, liability or liquidity? If you had to pick one, it seems to me they have done a lot already for liquidity, but nothing for liability. It's definitely true. I think I said this at the outset of this part of the discussion. Certainly, they're both important. My view is that at the moment, everybody's asking for liability protections in the business community. It's pretty well teed up. What isn't teed up is a universal acknowledgement that more needs to be done to address the ongoing liquidity issues. So I personally believe that if you feel like your business needs more liquidity to get to the other side of this crisis or get to a vaccine, now is the time to ask for that if you're only going to ask for one. And I think it's a much more personal story to talk about unless you've already been hit with a lawsuit or seen the threat of litigation. It's a little bit more of a generic ask. But again, they're both important. That's why we put them both in this. We think there's space to talk about both. But my personal belief, just based on some conversations in the last 2 days since Congress has been back, is that particularly on the Republican side, I mean, there are Republicans right now that are saying, you know, I don't want to spend another dollar on coronavirus relief, which I think is, you know, a very naive approach. I think at this point, there's both a political upside and an economic upside to spending more to support both businesses and people that are unemployed. Suzanne or Mike, feel free to jump in on any of that.
Totally agree, Matt.
Yep. Well done, Matt.
I think we got time for maybe one or two more before we wrap this up here. Question is, it is important to have a second round of support funding for franchisees and other businesses, but what discussions are being had and steps are being taken to address the PPP terms for those businesses that have been forced to remain closed since March 16th? Many businesses will not be able to spend loan funds on employee compensation. Suzanne, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I think that was a really important part of the PPP Flexibility Act when we worked on that, about 6 weeks ago now. But there wasn't much wiggle room. And one of the pieces that we negotiated with our membership and our board of directors was that 60-40 threshold. So, this particular business probably is interested in 100% for rent or other types of expenses that are not connected to payroll, assuming that the employees aren't back online. And I think that was just one of the deals that we had to cut to get the terms in the PPP Flexibility Act. So that being said, really important story, and it's personal, and I think that you should highlight that in your meeting. I think the way that PPP is headed right now is in terms of not making any specific changes to the program, but just the eligibility. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't share your story, because these next 3 weeks are critical, and just report back whatever feedback you get in your meetings on that specific point so we can follow up directly with the staff. Mike, not sure if you want to add anything more to that.
This goes back to what a choppy recovery this is going to be, and the need for additional stimulus, because any misconceptions, misapprehensions that this was going to be a hump to get over in terms of the recovery, and then everyone would be fine. The economy is a lot more likely to look the way it does today in a year probably than not. So we've got a long way to go here, and everyone on the Hill should know. And I should note also that on both these issues, liability and liquidity, in our favor is the fact that there's a lot of traditionally democratic constituencies like schools, nonprofits, and charities that are interested in these same issues as well. So it's a fascinating time, and again, we're grateful all of you are so engaged here tomorrow.
Totally agree. There's a comment kind of question here. Most of the standard messages seem to be from franchisees. What should the focus of a franchisor's message be? I mean, I would speak on behalf of your entire system and the conversations you're hearing and having with your franchisees. I imagine that they're, depending on the system, that the industry, it's all over the map. So some franchisees are probably doing better than others, depending on the state that they're in. But I think getting across the point that, more needs to be done. And, a franchisor just provides such a great vantage point into, even if you're not across the entire country, how all types of small businesses are impacted in different ways, depending on, the virus in their location, and what the state or local government response has been in that area. So our last question here is on PPP, and despite efforts in early April, this brand is still only 56% funded on PPP. It's frustrating that there's still money out there, but it's not getting to them. Would it be okay to share our personal stories? Mike or Suzanne, you want to take that?
I mean, sure, absolutely. This is an amazing story to share. I think it's actually pretty typical, if not higher, than many of our systems. So I think that's exactly the reason why you need to say that we need the money. If there's money left over, I'll gladly take it. And happy to answer any more personal questions, or if you want a personal connection to your constituent, your members of Congress and their staff. But really appreciate you sharing that, Mike.
Yeah, agree, and it just highlights that, for those of you engaging with the Hill tomorrow, don't worry so much about these talking points. Keep your asks clean. We want more access to we need more access to capital. We need sensible short-term liability protections, but focus on your story. Focus on how you've been navigating the pandemic, all the PPE and other resources you've had to invest in, these new sunk costs that you've never had to face before, in addition to the pressure on demand. And those will be the most compelling things you can do tomorrow.
Thanks. And just to wrap things up here, some of you are joining us at 4:30 for a call with Soapbox to talk through the mechanics of these phone calls that we've scheduled for tomorrow. And I think, many of you have come to the Hill for years, if not longer, decades, to do this meeting. We get together in groups with your state delegations and sort of run through the mechanics of the meetings and who's going to be the foreman, as I like to say, and kind of lead the discussion. Many of the calls will have IFA staff members on them as well. So I would definitely encourage that. We'll talk more about it at 4:30 and look forward to your continued participation in that, as well as the digital engagement for our broader group of advocates. So with that, I think we're going to close out this session. I want to thank my team, Erica, Suzanne, and Mike. I want to thank Janine and Spencer behind the scenes here for helping us run the show. And of course, Paychecks, our flagship sponsor, as well as our many other sponsors of the fan meeting. We couldn't do without you. And we'll see you out there and appreciate everything everybody's doing to help support the IFA during this incredibly challenging time. Thank you.
Thank you.